Now, if you're a frequent viewer of this show, then you know that we've been documenting the Obama administration's war on whistleblowers, from Bradley Manning and WikiLeaks to the case of Thomas Drake, amongst others. But today, let's take a good look at what this administration is doing to James Risen, the award-winning New York Times reporter who they're trying to force to reveal his source. It's a case carried over from the Bush administration, and in an affidavit that Risen filed last week, he notes that he was told by reliable sources that former Vice President Dick Cheney pressured the Justice Department to personally target him because Cheney was unhappy with his reporting and wanted to see him in jail. Now, the reporting in this particular case refers to a chapter in his 2006 book, State of War, The Secret History of the CIA and the Bush Administration. In that chapter, he described a CIA effort to thwart Iran's nuclear ambitions by secretly providing them with faulty blueprints. But it was more than just that. Risen reported on the waterboarding of detainees in Iraq. He broke the story of the NSA's warrantless wiretapping program. He also said in his affidavit that he was subject to government surveillance and harassment during the Bush administration, but that he feels that the Obama administration is just continuing the effort of intimidation. So why would Obama pursue him so vigorously? And as our guest today wrote, in doing so, has Obama finally become Dick Cheney? Joining me to discuss this is Connor Friedersdorf, associate editor at The Atlantic. Connor, thanks so much for joining us. For starters, what do you mean when you say that Barack Obama has finally become Dick Cheney?
Well, he obviously hasn't morphed into an old man with heart problems. What I mean, particularly, is that on this issue, he is taking the Bush-Cheney position that James Risen should be jailed if he doesn't reveal his source. And it's particularly galling because President Obama relied on the reporting of James Risen in particular in making a lot of very solid critiques of the Bush administration. So it's disappointing to see him take the position of Dick Cheney on this particular issue.
Well, would you say that James Risen actually helped get Obama elected?
I would say that. I think that if not for reporters like James Risen, and James Risen in particular, we wouldn't know about the illegal acts that the Bush administration committed in the name of the war on terror. We wouldn't know about the illegal wiretapping that the NSA did. We wouldn't know about the illegal torture that was done to detainees overseas. And so there are just all sorts of critiques that President Obama made during his campaign that are a direct result of James Risen doing this reporting at the New York Times.
Now, I think that we can throw in this case with the larger war on whistleblowers that the Obama administration is waging. But, I mean, which one of those cases would you say is the worst? Of course, there's the case with WikiLeaks, with Bradley Manning. The Thomas Drake case, mysteriously, most of those charges were actually dropped. But here, Risen is being asked to reveal one of his sources. That's, I'd say that would be pretty damaging for journalism.
It would be damaging because all of these cases that we've been talking about that were so important to expose during the Bush administration, that reporting couldn't have been done without reporters granting anonymity to sources. And if James Risen were to reveal his source in this case, he couldn't go on to get these kinds of scoops in the future. And what some of us in journalism fear is that the Obama administration, now that it's in power and now that it doesn't want its secrets spilled across the front pages of the New York Times, that it knows this all too well and that it's trying to prevent that kind of thing from happening in the future.
But why would they go after the Bush guys? I mean, right, we know that they haven't gone after the Bush administration for actual, you could say war crimes or for bringing torture into the American, history here when it comes to our war on terror. You can say that they obviously haven't gone after Wall Street for some of their biggest crimes, but now they want to go after a guy left over from the Bush administration that apparently Dick Cheney had a personal problem with. It just doesn't make sense.
Well, by Obama's own admission, he isn't going after the Bush administration for some of its lawlessness because he says that it would harm the country's ability to look forward and to implement some of the things that he wants to do during his term. He doesn't want to have these backward-looking fights. In this case, so someone might say, well, then, Barack Obama, why are you looking backward to something that happened during the Clinton administration, this case of Iranian spying gone awry? And, why is it appropriate to look backward and prosecute Risen? Well, maybe the answer is that a guy like Risen, or investigative reporters generally, in some ways make it harder for presidents to operate, in some ways make it harder for them to help the government to escape scrutiny and embarrassment. And just as that applied to the Bush administration, it applies to President Obama. It's consistent with his logic of I'm going to do what I want to do in order to forward the agenda that I want to push.
But let's be honest here, right? This didn't all start just with the Bush administration or just be continued by the Obama administration. Haven't we seen a trend, or at least records of presidential administrations trying to intimidate and put pressure on journalists in the past?
Absolutely. In fact, one frustration of journalists is that every administration that gets into power tends to talk about government transparency beforehand, and then once they're the ones that would be subject to that transparency, they talk a good game. But in fact, when it comes down to it, they want to keep secrets and prevent these things from getting out. And President Obama is particularly disappointing because it's hard to think of any president that before he was elected talked so much about transparency and the importance of whistleblowers and protecting them. And so it's just a particular disappointment to see him do what a lot of other presidents have done before. Yeah,
well, he definitely talked a big game. You're right there. And, one of the things that we hear used often as the excuse is that this falls under the banner of national security. And that's what they try to claim with WikiLeaks as well. But anything that Risen reported, has that actually damaged our national security?
I've seen no evidence that it's damaged our national security. It's been several years since the Bush administration claimed that what he reported damaged our national security, and yet I've never seen anyone from the Bush administration come forward and say, look, here are the effects of this. This guy died abroad, and it's because of what James Risen reported, or this terrorist attack happened, and it's, we can trace it back to what James Risen reported. It's never happened, and I would encourage Americans who, of course, sometimes there are things that the government should keep secret, things that would damage our national security. But we've seen so many assertions that things have damaged our national security, and it seems that eventually you should be able to point to exactly how that happened. And I've never seen any allegation with that sort of specificity with regard to anything that Risen has reported, and certainly not something that happened way back in 2000 during the Clinton administration. Yeah, well, it's definitely another example, another scary example of what I think is, really a silencing campaign and an intimidation campaign by the Obama administration here. Connor, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Thanks for having me.